Hi everyone, Helen Blunden here. Hope you're happy, healthy and well. It's time for a new book review today. I want to share some lessons out of a book that I have recently read, and I would say it's one of my favorite books this year. If you're someone who wants to read about writers or read about the craft of writing, also wants a reflective read and also a quiet read, one that is about grief, unfortunately, then this is the one for you. I chose it simply because when I read the back cover, I thought it was in line with what I was feeling. It's been a month now since we had to put down our cat Pud. I must admit, I have been feeling the grief, and for anyone out there who has lost a pet, it is a very big loss in your life. I was feeling, I guess, very low, very depressed, very not anxious, but just sad that Pud wasn't in my life anymore. I wanted a book that was a little bit more comforting to read, and I had to put down a couple of books that I was reading at the time simply because they were jarring my head, and it was not the headspace I wanted to be at. This book by Sigrid Nunez, who's an American writer and has written a whole heap of other books, but this is the first time I have read her book. It is a prize winner. You can see all the prizes here, and the prizes she got for this was all in 2018 because it was published in that same year. This book is basically about a woman who unexpectedly loses her lifelong friend, a mentor. She's a writer, he was a writer, but he committed suicide. And we don't know why he committed suicide. There's inferences as to why he did it, but no one really knows why. He left a dog behind, and this dog was a big black and white Great Dane, a big doofus of a dog. His name was Apollo. Even though this male writer of hers had 3 wives and he had countless other girlfriends in his past, and by all means lived a full and glorious life with so many women in his life, he was also someone who was quite deep in his thoughts when it came to writing and the art of writing and how writers have changed over the times. When he died, none of his ex-wives wanted a dog, but they recalled that his best friend, would have liked to have the dog because she was also a dog lover in the past. And so one of his wives went up to her and said, rather than have the dog Apollo in a kennel, why not have him live with her? But she lived in a very tiny New York apartment, and I guess her hands were tied with regards to Apollo, but in the end she agreed to have Apollo come and stay with her. It was funny just to read the excerpts of this book of how the dog integrated into her very tiny house and into her life, and over time she got to love Apollo and understand his quirks, and in some way Apollo gave her what she needed to grieve her lifelong friend. And similarly, we find out the dog was also grieving his master. Now, this whole book is not like a story per se. If you can imagine her recalling and reflecting about the times that she would be talking to her best friend about life, about art, about teaching, about the act of writing, about books, about students. And we get this feeling that he wasn't very happy to be a teacher simply because he didn't accomplish the right to be a writer in his way. So, and the fact that he was also aging and having younger girlfriends also possibly may have played a part in the reason for his suicide. But again, we really don't know. Ultimately, this book was simply a recollection of memories of this lady talking about her time with her lifelong friend and mentor as she comes to terms with the grief and his death and the sudden shock of his death. But through all this time, as she recalls the stuff, she's also going to lose her apartment because there are no dogs allowed in her New York apartment. But over time, we find that I guess people rally around her and help her out in some big way because they realize she's actually grieving. I wrote a whole heap of notes for this one, because for me, this book was not just about grief and not just about a story of a dog. It is a story of how our animals are able to help us overcome some difficulties in our life and to help us overcome our own grief. But it's also an understanding of the writer's world and where a writer would have difficulty. There was some elements here in this book that I thought had been covered in the past in my previous book by Olga Tokarczuk about writers and if writers are fakes, and it's also mentioned in this book. What I really liked about this book was if you're someone who enjoys writing or who does writing on the side, it's also a discussion about how writers are and the pressure of writers nowadays to write books that actually sell. And to some people, selling books is not the be all and end all, but there is a pressure now in the market to be able to write a book and make it become a bestseller. So as writers, where do they get their stories from? They get them from people, everyday people. And there's this question of whether that also didn't sit well with the writers here. The fact that who are they as people? Are they really empathetic? Are writers really empathetic if what they're doing is actually extracting the stories from everyday people and writing it down? So who gets the benefit here? There was a quote here that really struck my fancy, and it said, if reading really does increase empathy, as we are constantly being told that it does, it appears that writing takes some away. And this was the idea of writers being fakes, whereas readers are more empathetic. Readers actually can get into the heart of the story and can ask questions and can delve deeper, like what we're doing here. But what do writers do? Writers simply look at what's happening and then create that story from someone else's story. Does that mean that they are less empathetic, or does the act of writing make them empathetic? These were good questions, I thought. Some of the other things that really interested me was the fact that she mentioned that the relationship between writers and readers had changed drastically. In the past, we had readers who were not so careless with their reading, and in here, he actually quoted saying, "You had become so dismayed by the ubiquitous of careless reading." And that made me think about what it is that I'm doing here. I read quite a lot, but I also take a copious amount of notes when I'm reading to try and derive my own meaning and then align it to some of the life lessons I can apply in my own world, and also to try and derive some meaning and some context out of other people and how they think and what situations happen, and then how I can apply those situations in my own life. And in some way that has enabled me to also grow my empathy and be compassionate and see different viewpoints and different perspectives. And so I'm interested why he said that we have become so careless in our reading, which then also reminded me of a recent article that I had read about the fact that people aren't reading as much anymore, and students aren't reading. It's not expected of them to read books, and they don't have the attention and the focus anymore. And so I thought, maybe he's right. Maybe there is a whole world of careless readers out there who are missing the opportunity to be able to read books and delve deeply in them and then derive some meaning from them. He says here that writers now find themselves regularly alarmed or praised for things that they had never occurred to them, or things that they had never expressed or would never have expressed, things that represented pretty much the opposite of what they actually believed. She talked about his conversations around fiction as documentary fiction, how nowadays everything fiction has to be made into some kind of documentary fiction where the stories are come out from people from ordinary lives, that there's no invention in some way, there's no authorial point of view. She also said that he thought that women made better narrators simply because they can examine their own lives and feelings in ways that men usually don't. He said maybe possibly men should just stop writing altogether. And this was really interesting because I thought to myself, no, we don't want that. We don't want that. We want more opinions. We want more perspectives and more different perspectives. These were the kind of like the things that were constantly mentioned in this book, these recollections of discussions and conversations that she had with her best friend about writers. And I think I got the feeling that he started to become very jaded as a writer, and that was the reason why he hated teaching. If you can't write, where do you go to? You start to teach. So a lot of the questions in this book were all related to not just grief, but also saying maybe grief over the writing process, of how writers now have all sorts of expectations on them. Maybe he couldn't handle it anymore. Maybe he had reached the point where he said, that's enough is enough. I don't want to write in such a way that puts me in a box, simply because nowadays it is expected that writers write more documentary fiction, that imagination and creativity in fiction is really not required anymore. I beg to differ. The questions here was all about what's the point of writing? Why do some writers and some people, maybe even the market, find it shameful? Why is it that those who have suffered, it seems that writers are the only people who can empower them by writing their story? Maybe it's because he mentioned that to be a writer, you're already in a privileged position because you have time to write. Others out there who lead busy lives, who have to feed their families, are not going to sit down and write their books. So to become a writer nowadays, it comes from a privileged position. So maybe to silence the real writer's voice, to silence them, is the expectation that, hey, at least use your skills for being able to give voice to those who can't write and who can't share their story. Lots and lots of ideas about writing in this book. Even though I thought it was going to be a book about grief and feeling about pet loss, it ended up being something completely different. One of the ideas I also got from this book, which I'm going to do, and well, I have been doing, but I haven't been calling it as such, is I guess once a month, I leave my Fridays quite free. In those Fridays, what I do is I go out and discover my city. I'm at a time here now that I can't travel internationally. Number one, it costs a lot. I can't travel interstate. Number two, it costs a lot. And so what I can do though is become a tourist in my own city. And so once a month, every Friday, I will go out and explore my own city. Basically just walk the town. And to date, I have also been going around different suburbs of Melbourne and really enjoying more around what's my local area. It was something that I picked up during the COVID lockdowns, where within the 5 kilometre radius, I had discovered all my different places in my 5k radius. And after COVID, I thought I'm going to continue this, and I have been doing it in the last couple of years, the upshot being that now I have pretty much discovered a lot of the suburbs all around Melbourne simply by taking a train or a tram out there, walking them. Now, when I do that, it doesn't mean I go shopping. It doesn't mean I go and spend money. I might go and have a coffee, but most of the time what I'm doing is just jaunting. I'm having a jaunt at different suburbs. In this book, they mentioned this concept of flaneur, and I thought to myself, oh my God, that's brilliant, because what I've been doing is Flur Friday. And so I thought to myself, right, I'm going to formalize it. Once a month, this Friday that I've been going around talking and saying to people that it's my Friday, my day off, I'm going to call it Flur Friday, where Helen does her flaneuring or flaneursing, because I'm female, the flaneurs, and I'm going to do that. Maybe that's a lesson in there that, hey, if you can set aside a day for you to flaneur, for you to kind of smell the roses, look around you, explore, be curious, enjoy life, where it doesn't necessarily mean to spend money. It just means to get out there and enjoy the world around you, because we have limited time. That was a very interesting lesson for me. Flur Friday. That's what I got out of this book. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. Bye for now.